Afternoon Adventures coming back at you with spell changes in the new 2024 PHB. I guess it's not that new, it came out back in last September, but here we are. 2025, D&D, here we go. Continuing on with the spells that start with B, we're just going alphabetically. It's worth mentioning, I won't be going over spells that haven't changed, and I won't be going over spells that had very, very minor tweaks to their material components or just sort of phrasing in general. Things like use an action now says use a magic action. Things like that. I'm not going over those tiny little details. The spells work the same. Diving right in, Banishing Smite. This spell is very cool. We get to slap someone with our weapon or an unarmed strike and send them to another plane of existence. If they're left with 50 HP or lower, now they do get a saving throw though. It's a charisma saving throw, much like the banishment spell. Unlike the banishment spell, they always come back at the end of the spell's duration, whether we drop concentration or the spell runs out at the end of its minute duration. The spell used to very vaguely describe how the banishment works. It just sort of said, as in the banishment spell, and then left us to our devices to figure out what that means. Now it specifies they go to a harmless demiplane and come back when the spell ends. Also, the spell is a prompted bonus action when we hit a creature, like the other smite spells. That is new for all of the smites and is not unique to this spell, but there you go. I'm going to be saying that for every single smite, so get used to it, I guess. Banishment has had its range reduced to 30 feet, which is a bit unfortunate, but the spell is still very powerful. The material component is also now always the same. Instead of finding an object that your target finds unsavory, now it's just a pentacle, which is a 5-pointed star inside a circle. Permanently banishing creatures is still possible, but is now based on the creature's type instead of the creature's home plane. So, elementals will go to the elemental plane that they're from, celestials the upper planes, fiends the lower planes, undead go to the Shadowfell, and fae go to the Feywild, of course. Barkskin got a bit of a glow up. It is a bonus action to cast now instead of a full action. It does not require concentration. That part's important because concentration is costly. And it now gives an AC of 17 unless your AC is already higher instead of 16. All of that is just a little better. And the material component has changed. It doesn't require oak bark specifically, which is important if you're in a setting that doesn't have oak trees. Beast Sense got a bit of a buff in that it no longer requires the caster to swap between our own senses and the beasts. Now we sort of perceive through both at once. Befuddlement is a weird one in that it is Feeble Mind renamed for whatever reason, and it works a bit differently in that it now doesn't reduce the target's intelligence and charisma scores to 1. It does still prevent spellcasting and the use of magic actions. That part's a bit new. If a befuddled target has magic items that require a magic action to use, if they have class features that require a magic action to use, obviously spellcasting uses the magic action, befuddled targets can't do any of those things. Period. And otherwise they can still follow their teammates and protect them, things like that. They retain their personality. Overall, this is kind of a nerf, for the most part, to how the spell functions, although it did get a huge boost to its damage. The damage used to be applied before the saving throw, so the target would always take 46 psychic damage, and then the saving throw was for the rest of the spell's effects. Now the damage is gated behind the spell with half damage on a successful save, but it now deals 10d12 psychic damage. So that's, even if they succeed their save, that's a lot more. And lastly, the material component for befuddlement is now a keyring with no keys. So just a ring, I guess. As per usual, most people casting the spell are going to be using an arcane focus or a component pouch anyway, so don't really need to worry about this stuff, but there it is. You just have a keyring, I guess. Bestow Curse, specifically the third bullet point effect, has changed. Now it forces the target to dodge if they fail the saves instead of doing absolutely nothing. And the spell also removed language about alternate curse effects, making up stuff and getting it approved by your DM. That's always a thing you can do in these games. Creativity is encouraged, but the spell doesn't say that you can make up your own curse effects now. Bigby's Hand had a number of changes because it has a number of effects to begin with. Its material component no longer requires a snakeskin glove, now it's just a glove, which is good if your campaign doesn't have snakes. The clenched fist damage has increased from 4d8 to 5d8. The forceful hand effect has been limited to huge creatures, so no more shoving around gargantuans, and it now has a strength saving throw instead of a contested strength check. That's part of why the hand doesn't have its own stats now. The grasping hand effect, similarly, can only affect huge targets. Its damage has increased by 2d6, and it now uses a dexterity saving throw, much like the other one uses strength. Both of those effects also do not impose any penalty or give any bonus for grappling creatures of certain sizes anymore. It's just a flat-out saving throw. And last, interposing hand doesn't follow a creature around anymore. It stays stationary, though the caster can move it turn after turn, and simply acts as cover and blocks enemy units from moving through its space. Good for blocking doorways and such, but now it doesn't harass a creature. Blade Barrier now deals its damage right when it appears, which is always very nice, and when the creature enters the wall for the first time on a turn or ends its turn there. It also deals force damage instead of slashing now. The Blade Ward cantrip has changed in that it now lasts up to a minute, requiring concentration, and essentially increases AC by a d4. Not literally. Technically it's a penalty on enemy attack rolls, but the same thing. So in a way this is kind of like a cantrip version of Shield of Faith. I think that's pretty good. Bless now requires a material component, a holy symbol worth at least 5 gold pieces, instead of holy water with no specified cost. Otherwise, the spell works exactly the same as it always did. Light now affects undead and constructs, which is very cool. Unfortunately, it doesn't deal max damage to plants anymore. They get disadvantage on their saving throw, but the damage is still rolled with dice like normal. Blinding Smite is a prompted bonus action when we hit a creature, like the other Smite spells, and now does not give an initial saving throw. The target, if hit by the attack, is simply blinded. Period. They do get saves at the end of their turns, but for at least a round-ish, they're just blind. That's huge. That's crazy good. And the spell can be upcast for 1d8 more damage per level, which it didn't used to do. Blindness Deafness is now transmutation magic rather than necromancy, for whatever good that does us, and now it has a range of 120 feet, so that's all the better. Blink now uses a d6 instead of a d20 for determining whether we pop out to the ethereal plane or not. I'm not really sure why they changed that. It's 50% either way, but hey, whatever. They also removed language about ending the spell as an action, because that is a thing we can do with all spells anyway. If the spell isn't concentration, the caster can end the spell as an action, period. So that part of the spell didn't so much change, but the language changed because that's a general rule now. And last but certainly not least, we have Branding Smite. At least that's what it used to be called. Now it's called Shining Smite. It's transmutation now rather than evocation, and it is a prompted bonus action like the other smites, and now it gives advantage on attacks against the target creature, a la Fairy Fire. Fairy Fire is a very good spell, so being able to apply that effect with a smite is just a cool new thing that paladins can do. I love it. And that is all of the differences in the spells in the 2024 Player's Handbook for the letter B. I hope these videos are helping to sum up what's different, and I will see you in the next one. The letter C has a ton of spells, so it's going to be a longer one. Hoo boy. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for liking and subscribing. Happy adventuring in 2025.